Alright, so before we begin talking about writing number 1 and writing number 2, there are a few things that we have to consider and discuss. Number one thing that we need to talk about is writing concisely. What does concisely mean? Concisely means that you avoid wordiness. You avoid all those unnecessary words, and a lot of people do write all those unnecessary words in order to meet the word requirement, the word limit. And the test makers hate it. That is why they are going to check your essay in terms of how concisely you wrote it. And if you used a lot of all those unnecessary words, a lot of things that you could avoid saying, and it would be better if you avoided that wordiness, then they're going to take some points out of you. So what we're going to discuss in this lecture is writing concisely. How do we make sure that our essay is written concisely? Let's have a look. So first of all, in order to write concisely, we need to avoid empty phrases. It is a common mistake of many people who are trying to write in English language when English is not their first language. They try to use as many words as they can so that they meet the word limit. Sometimes it's very common for other languages. For example, for Russian language, it's very popular to use many words in order to describe something better. But in the standard written English, we need to avoid those empty phrases. Empty phrases are those words which we can just cross out, delete, and then the sentence will not lose anything. The sentence will actually become more concise or shorter and actually better. Let's have a look at the example. When all things are considered, young adults of today live more satisfying lives than those of their parents, in my opinion. So it is a very common sentence by someone who is writing an essay in English. Here, what we need to cross out is when all things are considered and in my opinion. These phrases are empty phrases because if we delete them, we don't lose anything. We don't lose any key information. And the sentence actually becomes more brief or shorter and better. It just loses everything unnecessary. So the best way to rephrase the sentence is young adults of today live more satisfying lives than those of their parents. So it is very important for you to avoid that wordiness, to avoid these empty phrases such as when all the things are considered, in my opinion, blah, blah, blah. Because if you use these empty phrases in your essays, the test makers or the guys who are going to check your essay are going to think that you use those empty phrases in order to meet the word limit. So they are going to assume that you cannot write a good essay within the word limit. You cannot just add new ideas, but you're trying to meet the word limit by those empty phrases. And they do not like it. So you're going to lose points. So keep in mind that you need to avoid those phrases. Even if in your high school or in your school, when you were learning English, they told you to use them, it's wrong. It's wrong in TOEFL. In the TOEFL test, do not use those empty phrases. Let's have a look at another example. Due to the fact that our grandparents were under an obligation to help their parents, they did not have the options that young people have at this point in time. So here, we also can cross out some of the empty phrases. Let's have a look. Because our grandparents were obligated to help their parents, they did not have the options that young people have now. So you see that this version of the sentence is much shorter. It actually saved us pretty much in line. So instead of due to the fact that, we can easily just say because. So instead of 5 words, we're using 1. We're under an obligation to. Instead of these words, we can just say we're obligated to. And again, we're using a better construction, so we're using less words. Their parents, they did not have the options that young people have. Instead of at this point in time, we can just say now. And again, at this point in time, 5 words can be easily replaced with just 1 word. So if you have an option to use a shorter construction, a shorter version of the same idea, do that. Always try to use 1 word instead of 5 words. It saves you a lot of points. Avoid repetition. Let's have a look at what is repetition. The farm my grandfather grew up on was large in size. So this sentence is inconcise because we're using the words in size. But we don't really need these words because we already said that the farm was large. Of course, large means the size. So let's cross out in size. The farm my grandfather grew up on was large. Now it's a great sentence. It is concise. There's nothing to cross out. However, we can make it even more concise by saying, my grandfather grew up on a large farm. This way, we're saving grew up on was, right? So we are saving actually two words, on and was. We cross it out because we managed to rephrase the sentence and make it shorter. So always try to work on making your sentences shorter because you do not want to meet the word limit by adding all those unnecessary words. You want to make all your sentences concise and add more ideas. This is how you gain your points. Let's have a look at another example. My grandfather has said over and over again that he had to work on his parents' farm. So over and over again is inconcise. We can easily say repeatedly. My grandfather has said repeatedly that he had to work on his parents' farm. So this way is concise, and of course, if there is a more concise way to say something, do that. Now, let's talk about choosing the best grammar structure. This is also part of coherence. We always need to think about what is the best grammar structure to use in my sentence. If we do that, then our writing becomes coherent. Let's have a look at the example. The situation that resulted in my grandfather's not being able to study engineering was that his father needed help on the farm. You see that this sentence is a little bit inconcise, a little bit weird. We don't really like how it was grammatically structured. Let's have a look at the concise version. My grandfather couldn't study engineering because his father needed help on the farm. So you see that we do not have the situation that resulted in anymore. We also do not have being able to. Being is actually the horrible word. If you can avoid using being, of course do so. And every time you use being somewhere, always think of a better grammar structure. There's definitely one, which is going to allow you to avoid using the being. So here, the problem was that the situation is not the most important thing in the sentence. So when we're choosing our subject, which will then be followed by a verb, we are always trying to choose as a subject the most important thing in the sentence. The most important thing in our sentence is my grandfather. The most important person in the sentence, the most important subject of the sentence, my grandfather. My grandfather couldn't study engineering because he helped his father. So here, the grandfather is the main subject, and it is wrong to pick another subject. In this case, the situation. The situation was that is a wrong grammatic structure. So the rule here is the subject and verb of a sentence should reflect what is most important in the sentence. If here the most important things are my grandfather not being able to study engineering because of the work, this is what should be on the positions of the subject and the verb, not the situation, which was that, okay? Next, let's talk about another example of the grammar structure, the inconcise sentence. There were 25 cows on the farm that my grandfather had to milk every day. It was hard work for my grandfather. Let's have a look at the concise version. My grandfather worked hard. He had to milk 25 cows on the farm every day. So you see here that the inconcise sentence started with there were. Usually the where is, there were, there was, it is, it was, and stuff like that are not the best grammar structure. Usually when you write the sentence with there was, there were, there is, there are, blah blah blah, it is, etc., there is a better way to say that. So here, instead of writing there were 20 cows on the farm that my grandfather blah blah blah, we could just say my grandfather worked hard, he had to milk 25 cows. But actually there's even a better way to say that, a more concise sentence which actually saves us one line. My grandfather worked hard milking 25 cows daily. So you see that instead of every day we say daily, we also combined the two sentences. We didn't say it was hard work for my grandfather, instead we just said worked hard by doing something. So we combined these two sentences very nicely. This is our goal. This is what we're trying to do. So the rule here is it is, there is, are frequently just extra words that weaken your sentence. So try to avoid these constructions because you want to make your sentence more concise and stronger. Let's have a look at the next example. Dairy cows were raised on the farm, which was located 100 kilometers from the nearest university and was in an area that was remote. Of course, it's a lot of words in the sentence, so it is inconcise. Let's have a look at the more concise version. The dairy farm was located in a remote area 100 kilometers from the nearest university. So the thing here is that sometimes we have very complex sentences. We're going to write those complex structures. Maybe it is how it works in your language. But in the English language, we usually can take the complex sentence with a lot of clauses, and then take these clauses and make them shorter phrases. So take the entire clause and make it a short phrase. And also, in the complex sentences, sometimes we can take a phrase and then make it just one single word. So we're always trying to work on that. Make clauses phrases and make phrases single words. So the rule here, complex sentences can often be made more concise by reducing clauses to phrases and phrases to single words. This is exactly what happened here. Here in this inconcise sentence, we had a lot of clauses. We had the clause which was located 100 kilometers from the nearest university. And instead of that long clause, we just wrote 100 kilometers from the nearest university. And also, we had another clause, was in an area that was remote. Instead of that clause, we just wrote, was located in a remote area. And also, instead of dairy cows were raised on the farm, we actually crossed out any cows because they weren't important, and we just said the dairy farm was located, blah, blah, blah. So we crossed out all the clauses and we made them phrases. And the phrases, we made single words. Let's have a look at another example. In the fall, not only did the cows have to be milked, but also the hay was mowed and stacked by my grandfather's family. Let's have a look at the concise version. In the fall, my grandfather's family not only milked the cows, but also mowed and stacked the hay. So here we're saving about 3 words. So what happened here? In the inconcise sentence, we had the passive structure. The cows have to be milked, mowed and stacked by my grandfather's family. So usually the passive structure is not the best structure. We only use the passive structure when the focus is on the object, not the subject. When the subject is not important, let's say my grandfather's family is not important, the most important thing is the cows, but usually it doesn't work this way. Usually the focus is on the subject, so every time the focus is on the subject, we use the active grammar structure, not the passive voice. So the rule here is use the passive voice only when the object, not the subject, is in the focus. All right, 2 more examples. Let's have a look at the inconcise sentence. My grandfather didn't have time to stand around doing nothing with his school friends. So here, to stand around doing nothing, 5 words, which can be easily changed to just one single word. My grandfather didn't have time to loiter with his school friends. Loiter means stand around doing nothing. So sometimes we have verbs which require extra verbs to convey the meaning. And instead of using all those 3, 4, 5 words, we can just change the verb to another one, which doesn't require all these extra words. So like here, loiter means stand around doing nothing, but if instead of the loiter, we use the verb stand, then we need around, doing, and nothing. And we want to avoid the wordiness here. That is why we're using a better grammar structure, which means we use the word loiter. Okay, so the rule here is some verbs need extra words to convey meaning, but can often be replaced with one verb that carries a complete meaning by itself. Look for these verbs. All right, our last example. Profits from the farm were not large. Sometimes they were too small to meet the expenses of running a farm. They were not sufficient to pay for a university degree. So here we have 3 sentences, and let's have a look. I think we can combine them all. Profits from the farm were sometimes too small to meet operational expenses, let alone pay for a university degree. So sometimes we can combine several sentences into just one sentence, and it doesn't mean that the sentence is going to be huge. Sometimes there's such a great way to combine them all, then avoid using all these extra words, and then actually have a very concise one sentence, like we had in this example. So the rule here is information in 2 or more sentences can often be combined into one sentence. Alright, so we covered a lot of rules for coherence, for making your writing more coherent, for avoiding wordiness, avoiding empty words, avoiding repetition, and choosing the best grammar structure. In order for you to practice all of that and learn all of that, of course we have exercises, which can help you to master that skill of avoiding wordiness. So go ahead, do these exercises, and I will see you in the next video.